still says we're in a practice session.
We are. I haven't gone live yet.
Got it.
Going live now. Hello and welcome to this panel sponsored by AGL at the wonderful Youth for Youth iSummit. And we've got a wonderful discussion topic today, social media, connection at what price? And before we begin, I would just like to mention the AGL LookUp UK Digital Wellbeing Challenge, which is being launched today, and it's open to anyone living in the UK between 17 and 24 years old. So actually, all the panelists too, and they're obviously going to be entering, I'm sure. Anyway, to what we're discussing now, which is, as I said, social media and how we connect over it and what the price of that is. And we're going to start with some introductions.
Hi, my name's Madeleine Guinness. I studied game design at Parsons School of Design, which is one of the reasons I'm very interested in this topic. I now work as a product manager for an AR application, mobile application. So another reason I'm very interested in this is I'm kind of coming from the creator standpoint and sort of how to create an app that obviously, you know, attracts a lot of users and has a high retention rate without having them form bad habits and sort of be detrimental to their health. So I'm walking that fine line, and I find being on both sides very interesting.
I'm Mary Amanuel. I'm a data analyst at the NHSX Analytics Unit, and I used to work in digital marketing. So my job was literally to help companies boost their profile online on social media. The difference being I don't actually use social media much at all. So I'm coming from the perspective of someone who works in tech, but doesn't really use social media.
Hi, I'm Millie. I'm a recent graduate from Oxford Brookes, where I studied politics and sociology, which is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in this debate. I spent a lot of my degree looking at fake news and how political parties use social media to promote their views. And so I'm coming to this discussion from an academic standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, just from how I use social media and how I know that it affects my life and my friends' lives.
And finally, I'm Ella Meadon, and I graduated from reading English literature at Edinburgh in May, and I'm now currently working as an associate at Freuds. So I think I'm particularly interested in social media from a communications point of view, both in terms of how I communicate myself to other people, but also how they communicate to me and the impact on your sort of sense of self. And I'm definitely coming from it as a total social media addict, but incredibly aware of that as well, and that I am one of many. So yeah, thrilled to be part of the discussion.
Wonderful. What a great set of introductions. And I think obviously the first question we should ask is how you all use social media. I think it's going to be an interesting range from someone who uses it a lot, maybe like Ella, and then Mary, who uses it a little bit less. That almost sounded like I was naming and shaming. That wasn't the point. So Maddie, do you want to start off with how you currently use social media?
Yeah, of course. So I mainly use Instagram, I would say, but I'm very wary about the kind of content that I'm viewing there. So I've sort of tried to curate my own feed to only contain sort of like artists, current affairs, memes, things that interest me or entertain me. I very much try and stay away from accounts that sort of perpetuate feelings of feeling, you know, less than adequate or sort of unattainable beauty standards, all of that kind of stuff. I get a surprising amount of sort of plastic surgery before and afters in my Discover page, which I think is just the most unhealthy thing possible, to be honest. I'm more attracted now to LinkedIn because I've been looking more at the feed, and it's, you know, to me, it's striking me as Facebook, but the content I'm seeing is sort of informative, interesting, and not really social based. So I've been very much getting more into LinkedIn. I went through a bit of a TikTok addiction, which lasted a few months. I have been cold turkey for 2 months now, and it really was a challenge. Like, I felt the compulsion to open the app, which was something I hadn't really had before. And I just noticed that, like, the TikTok algorithm, you know, identifies your likes, your interests, your opinions, and then shows you the most extreme version of those. And it feels very divisive to me. And say my interests were political, luckily they're not, they're comedy and makeup. But, you know, say they were political, the content that, you know, I see people getting pushed is so clearly extreme and, like I say, divisive. And I just, and Facebook's doing it too. We all know that, sort of perpetuating the deep political divide, I think, that's happening right now. So those are the sort of 3 social medias that I would say, you know, affects my life currently.
That's wonderful. I'm going to get you on LinkedIn a lot more now. Millie, what about yourself?
I have not been as brave as Madeleine, and I haven't gone cold turkey yet on TikTok, which is something that I am trying to do. I guess as like my awareness for my digital well-being and digital hygiene like increases, I'm wanting to use the apps less and less, such as TikToks and Instagram, but it's also made me so aware of how they catch you, and how the apps make you, like, entice you in, and I just can't stop. But yeah, I use every kind of social media, and I'm guilty for it. But yeah, I'm definitely trying to reduce my screen time and reduce the amount that I'm using them, and trying to use them now purely to focus on connection.
So on that note, Millie, actually, we've got a question from the audience as Susan Reynolds, the wonderful founder of LookUp. And she was wondering why you use the word brave. And when you mentioned the sort of courage it took, if you could go a little bit more into that.
Well, I think it's quite difficult to try and cut yourself off from these social media sites. I wouldn't say courageous, as I think brave was probably a bit of a hyperbole, but I do think that because these social media apps are marketed to us as ways of garnering connection with friends, people from all over the world, and you're in theory able to have access to loads of different types of opinions, loads of different types of content, but in practice, as Madeleine was saying, the content that you actually gain access to is so contrived and really targets you as an individual. So I think you feel as if you're missing out on something if you try and take yourself away from the app, because you believe that the app is like allowing you to have these connections that you wouldn't be able to have otherwise. But I actually don't think that it does create the connection, like healthy connections.
I get you. So Ella, would you say you formed some healthy connections from social media? I mean, how would you say your use is of?
I think there's possibly a distinction between the way you connect with people on social media and the way you connect with the content. I personally feel that there's quite a difference between the way that I connect with what my friends are posting, or the way I communicate with my friends or family or whatever it is, or people from work. And then there's the way that I connect with the information that's being pushed by the app onto me through algorithms. And I think that distinction really does change the way you feel about it, the way you interact with the app, the way you see yourself, the way you see other people. I'm slightly guilty of following influencers from Copenhagen who are all beautiful and dressed really well. And I quite like that aesthetic sort of shallow interaction to some extent because it's sort of the new brochure. It's the way you advertise fashion. It's the way you become inspired by certain things. But there is a threshold at which point I think that it is particularly dangerous for impressionable young girls to be exposed to diets, body image, like booty was a particular one that I thought was really bad, like a slimming tea that a lot of influencers pushed a couple of years ago to basically tell girls to drink these teas and you lose weight within 14 days. And I think that sort of content is bad to connect with. But yeah, I personally have never downloaded TikTok. I think I have an addiction to social medias and I'm aware of that. So I never sort of went there at all. But I think if you can harness the right ones, like Twitter is something I'm quite keen to get more involved with, but I think their algorithm isn't quite the same as the way TikTok and Instagram is. I think they don't push stuff onto you, you've got to go and seek it. So I think I need to sort of sit down and follow the right people, and then it's probably a more academic connection rather than being a consumer.
That's really interesting. And so lastly, but not least, Mary, where do you find your use of social media is at the moment?
So my use of social media at the moment is, I think, higher than it was a few years ago. I use LinkedIn for work because I kind of have to. More of it is, I think LinkedIn is a necessary evil than something that I choose to do. But I'm sorry, but yes, TikTok, I'm on the TikTok as well. Like, it is genuinely, I don't know, there's something about that app that's incredibly enticing and very quickly and grips you and keeps you watching and watching. It's something I'm mindful of and I'm trying to reduce. Another app I use is It's Me. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a way of basically video and chat calling other people in different countries. And you have your own avatar, so it's not actually your face. So you make an avatar and chat with people. And what I like about that app, it prioritizes quality of interaction rather than quantity of interaction. So something I don't like about TikTok is, and I think this is what makes TikTok quite addictive. It's like, okay, you have 15-second videos. It's like quick, fast. But in It's Me, it's like you're talking to people for half an hour, and you develop a much deeper connection. So I think I've developed probably much more positive benefits from It's Me than TikTok.
Wonderful. And I think that's a brilliant way to then go to our question on describing the nature of connection with people on social media. Because obviously in the title of this talk, we're talking about how we connect and what the connection is like. And I think it's very interesting that Ella was sort of talking about how she connects with different things on social media, but the content versus the people. But I was wondering how you all feel you connect with people online. I mean, so Mary's just given a great example there of a different type of connection that has an emphasis on maybe length and depth and sort of more the quality of it. So I was wondering who would want to begin on that one.
I guess there is a lot to be said about the connection that social media does bring us. When I was away at uni, it meant that I was able to keep in contact so easily with my friends that went to different universities and my family while they were at home. And I'm actually moving to France on my own next month. And I don't think I'd have the bravery to do that if I didn't have the ability to know that my parents and my friends are only a phone call away or a WhatsApp away. So it definitely does bring us connections, but I think that is because I have real life connections with these people as well. So I think I like to use, I think the connections are good because they're not just surface level. It means that you can arrange to then see these people in person. And I think sometimes connections that are only on social media, say you follow someone on Instagram, I don't think that is a genuine connection in the same way that meeting someone in real life. I think it can be relatively surface level.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder, just going off of that, if anyone has made sort of connections with people on social media that have flourished into friendships. I mean, I just thinking myself, there was someone the other day who at his birthday, he had a friend that he while playing Fortnite. It does happen. I mean, I'm not a gamer myself, I don't have the skills, but I was wondering if anyone else sort of had that nature of connection with someone who they've met first online, but also obviously question about how you think connecting with people social media is. Maybe Ella.
I don't know if I've personally had a connection that's thrived from initially being online, but I think stuff like Hinge and Bumble and Tinder and an app that I think has launched or just about to launch called Thursday, and they're doing really clever, quite funny campaigns to get that out there. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because I'd say 2 years ago it was quite a taboo to meet someone online on a dating app, and it was sort of a point of embarrassment, at least with the people that I've talked to about it. But I'd say it is now the norm. I don't know many people who haven't been on one of those apps for at least some period of time. And I think it, like having Hinge has become the same as having Facebook. It's just one of those things that sort of operates on your phone. And that's interesting because I think that probably was spurred from COVID. I think our generation meeting people randomly at a pub couldn't happen because the pubs weren't open. And so that sort of like Brownian motion of random interactions wasn't happening. But I personally haven't had that sort of thriving relationship from an online meeting, but a lot of people have.
Yeah.
But I think something that I'm particularly interested in is the working from home element of the online meeting people. I started a job at the beginning of this summer where the majority of the office were working from home. So I was meeting my bosses, my colleagues, other interns, whatever, all over Microsoft Teams. And there was only so much connection I could make through that sort of platform. And it's only since we came into the office in September, 3-4 days a week, that I actually feel like I've actually met and got to know the people I'm working with and know what I'm doing is my job. There are benefits that come from it. Obviously, it's cheaper, it's more time efficient. Meetings, appointments, business travel, they're all compressed. It's good for sustainability, it's good for finances, it's time efficient, but I don't think it's instead of the face-to-face. I think it's sort of a hybrid combination, because ultimately I don't think you can substitute the sitting in the same room as someone and face-to-face.
If I could possibly not disagree, but sort of play devil's advocate here, I had exactly the same experience. My first job I started 13 months ago, and it's a US-based company. And so I've known these people for over a year. I speak to them every day. I consider a lot of them like very close friends at this point, because we just work constantly. And it's strange that I've never met them. But at the same time, I don't feel a lack of, even though I thought I would, I don't feel a lack of like bond or communication whatsoever, actually. And I rather love that, you know, our lead developer is in Finland. We've got lots of people in Russia, all over the United States. And I actually really enjoy that sort of meeting of minds wherever we all are. And like you say, it's sort of, it is also a convenience, considering I work in tech, and basically everything we do is code reviews, design reviews, and sort of quality assurance testing. All of that is so much easier with screen sharing. And when I was in offices for internships and we were doing code reviews and testing and all of that, you know, someone's got the HDMI, something's not working, an input's off, and we're all kind of on a TV, and actually everything goes so much faster and smoother, weirdly, over, you know, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, which is a surprise to me. But I look forward to meeting my colleagues, but it's not something, I don't feel like I'm missing out in any way, not having them in person. And there are also a lot of really interesting softwares now that sort of icebreakers specifically targeted at co-workers who really have never met each other. And, you know, it's one thing being in a boardroom and, you know, you have your body language, you can have a laugh, you can talk about the weekend, but really when you're on a video chat, you're there to work, and you're not really going to have a chit chat about what you did last week. And so we did some very strange icebreaker things that are sort of very necessary, but they were a little bit intimidating to me, because sort of one of the features of this was, you know, you do a would you rather, and there's 10 of us, and then all of a sudden this software goes, you and Tina have 5 minutes to discuss this would you rather. And I don't really know Tina. And all of a sudden me and Tina are face to face talking about something, you know, something very personal that, you know, I'd never expect. And I find out one team member is in an a cappella group and someone else does musicals. And, you know, I'm finding out all this new stuff, which I suppose I'm missing out and would have known in person. But at the same time, it's interesting how many products are coming out of the woodworks to sort of try and bridge that gap. And I thought I would find it hideously awkward, but actually I feel much closer to the people that who I was partaking with. So I slightly come in from the other end, in that I'm not necessarily missing that face-to-face connection, weirdly, even though I thought I would, I suppose.
And Mary, I guess the nature of connection, how do you find it on social media? I mean, you talked a bit earlier about that wonderful, you've got to get me onto that actually. I love the idea of talking to someone for an hour. And that's obviously one way in which you connect with people. And do you think, I mean, is that what you sort of rely on, or do you find, how else do you find you're connecting with people on social media?
Oh, definitely. So, I mean, I work full time and I didn't go to university. It's very hard to find people my age, just out and about. You know, my colleagues are decades older than me. It's sometimes hard to relate to them. So I do make a lot of friends starting online, but I have a kind of almost an implicit rule to meet up in person as soon as possible. You know, I think texting in particular can give almost a false sense of intimacy that doesn't actually really exist, a tangible intimacy. I think a lot of very important things and connections and this thing called a vibe, you know, this unspoken vibe, can only be sensed in person. I have made definitely connections. I mean, look at all of us, right? Where do we live? Like, we live like all over London. This would be very hard to do in person. So it does bring people together that might otherwise never be together. So in terms of finding people, yes, but in terms of depth and quality of connection, I think there is a limit. I think something that's really interesting, I don't know if you've ever watched 90 Day Fiancé, which is a program where people in the US or in the UK, they basically find love with someone in another country, and they've never met each other. Sometimes they haven't Zoomed each other, video called each other, but they're already agreeing to get married. And often what happens, sadly, is when they do actually meet this person, their motivations are not pure. They often just want a visa. They don't actually love the person. And so there are certain things one can only find out in person. And I think my last thought is, there's also an issue about temperament. I think I'm an extrovert. I like to be around people in person. However, some people might prefer the slowness and to be able to think about their responses if they're on social media, which you don't really have the option to do in person. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
That's wonderful, Mary. It's sort of like that you're also typing questions, because exactly what you said has come up in 2 questions. So we're definitely going to touch on those now. So Beverly Pell has asked a wonderful question saying, can conversation on social media be seen as the same as conversation in real life? What is the difference? And I think that is a great one just to lead on for the rest of the panel off of what Mary said.
I think that's a really good point in terms of, you know, when you're talking to people online or via text, you have that time to think what you're going to say and sort of compose your tone and your points. And I think, you know, if ever it also comes into, you know, I don't know if anyone's ever had an argument with a friend over like text or social media. And well, firstly, I think we all know the tone and way things are put can be horribly misconstrued, which means that, you know, definitely a face-to-face conversation rather than misunderstanding, you know, a full stop or something, you know, pretty minor. And then also, yeah, the fact that you have time to think over your responses, and maybe that's better in that you could take time to step away from the situation, have a think, come back to it. Or it gives people a lot of time to sit and simmer and then come up with an interesting reply. So I think, yeah, Mary, you're very right that just the time that we're afforded by having that gap of technology definitely changes, you know, how I interact with people, and just having that buffer essentially. Yeah, I think it definitely changes.
And Millie, what about you? Have you found yourself making use of the differences between communicating on social media and in person? Is that something you recognize?
Yeah, I really liked how Mary described it, how your conversations online on social media give you this kind of false sense of intimacy that when actually having conversations in person, face to face, the level of intimacy is completely different. Madeleine was saying, how tones can be misconstrued, and in person you can hear the tone of someone's voice, you can see their body language, you can see the emotion in their face, whereas texting on a screen, it's just not, I wouldn't say it's the same. And I don't think that we should see them in the same way. I think that we should acknowledge the fact that there is a very tangible difference between the connection online, conversations online, and conversations face to face.
If I could just jump in as well, Tom, I think going off what Millie's just said, which is a great point, but I think there's also a false sense of privacy with messaging people, and that can come in two ways. I think, for example, the argument with a friend, which I'm sure everyone has had at some point, screenshots, I think, are a massive point of losing trust and assurance in that relationship, because anything you then communicate with that person, you're not sat one-on-one in a room, they could be sat with a bunch of people, they could forward the screenshot onto a group chat. Anything you say to a colleague could then go in front of your boss. My dad calls it the Daily Mail test. Anything you write to anyone you work with, could it be posted with a picture you don't want anyone to see along with the comment you've written on the front page? If not, probably don't send it, which is a good thing to keep in mind. But I think it's a false sense of privacy, and nothing you say ever really stays between two people one way or another. But that can also come into a point of cyberbullying, I think, is another point of when you feel a slight disconnectedness to who you really are because you're communicating online. One can communicate differently. And I think that sort of cyber confidence in some people to say what they would not say in person can be a very harmful thing to people when receiving messages that really, whether it's someone at school or someone at uni or whatever, or someone at work, would not have had the confidence to say those sort of things in a room with you. So yeah, I think that space and time to think when communicating can be a double-edged sword at times.
And going off of that, we've had a question from Christian even, and it was talking about, I think it really links to the pandemic a bit in a way, but also just the nature of interaction with people over social media, perhaps if it's someone you've not seen in ages, so you've been talking to them on that, and whether you feel sort of shy in person when meeting someone. I mean, obviously we've got maybe everyone's an extrovert on the panel. I don't know, Mary said she was one, but I guess you can have a shy I'm not sure you can have a shy extrovert, maybe you can, but I wonder how you would answer that, just the nature of meeting people in person versus social media, and looking at the idea of being shy or not, or maybe we'll just a whole gamut of emotions.
I'd say that I definitely noticed coming out of the pandemic, I went back into my final year at university and I felt incredibly introvert, and I have been an extrovert for 22 years of my life, and I felt a lot shyer around people I've known for a long time and when meeting new people. And I think that lack of confidence I interpreted as having only communicated online with quite a few people and not having that physical day-to-day interaction the way I had before. And I think with that can come a bit of insecurity, but only when you go back into the physical situation. I think until then you can feel like you are still exactly how you felt before. I wouldn't say I feel as shy anymore, but I definitely noticed it at the time.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say I was the same as Ella. I'm the same. I've been an extrovert all my life, but somehow in the pandemic, I mean, it sounds funny to say, but going back into normal life, going post-pandemic, going back into uni, even just going on the tube, I kind of forgot how to do normal life. Going from Zoom lectures where I could sit in my bed with my camera off and listen to my lecturer from the comfort of my own home, to having to walk into a lecture theatre with like 800 other students, suddenly felt so intimidating, even though I'd done it for 2 years prior to that. And the same with, I don't know, I think definitely it can create it's like what Ella was saying, this false sense of line. You kind of feel like you're protected behind the screen, whereas going back into real life and making these real life connections again suddenly felt really daunting, even though it is, I mean, it's innately human to connect with everyone. And I think that is also really evident in how much we all use social media. It shows how much humans have that innate desire to connect. But I've gone off on a tangent.
No, that's wonderful. Love a tangent. Mary, what about yourself? How the coronavirus, the idea of suddenly then being back in person with people and no longer sort of connecting just on social media, but as sort of both and.
I think this is a really great question, and just in my context, I work full time, but I have a lot of meetings. So I think I have about 22 hours worth of meetings every week, which is quite intense. And so I think through having lots of Zoom calls, I'm mastering small talk. But I think at the same time, I was struggling with medium talk and bigger talk. So in meetings, you have a very clear agenda and you have a clear stopping point. You know, half an hour we're going to talk about these things, and you socialize for probably the first 1 minute and the last one, then the last 1 minute. But in person, there aren't those clear boundaries, right? There isn't that clear construction. You have to, be in the moment with someone and converse with them, and that was something that I was incredibly out of practice with. And something that I was definitely anxious about. I think shyness was not the issue. I was very keen to meet people, but anxious about not being able to predict the interaction or when it was going to end. I think that made me quite anxious. But yeah, I think Zoom has helped us master very short conversations with a clear agenda. But when it comes to deeper issues, you kind of get a bit lost, I think, and a bit anxious.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I mean, on that point about the sort of social nature of talking at the end and the beginning of meetings, I guess that the coronavirus pandemic has changed our approach. And it'd be interesting to know if you if you found, if we go back to the question on social media usage, how much the pandemic changed your usage of various apps? Was that when you downloaded certain apps or went on them more?
Yes, pre-pandemic, I used to be really proud of the fact that my screen time was always low. I didn't really use social media all that much. I would text my friends. And then the pandemic came and I suddenly found myself with nothing to do other than download TikTok and watch videos and lose hours of my day scrolling through nonsense. And so the pandemic definitely increased my usage 100%. And now it's, as I was saying earlier, now it's difficult, even though we're like coming back into normal life, to try and reduce my screen time back to what it was pre-pandemic, because we've also now, I've become like almost quite dependent on these apps. So yeah.
I totally agree with Millie. During the lockdowns, my screen time rocketed. I was not really someone who sat on apps very much. And for the first lockdown, I was in New York. I lived alone in a very small apartment, and obviously New York was incredibly strict. You really weren't allowed to leave your home. And I ended up spending, 4 hours a day on FaceTime to various people. I was constantly, on TikTok, Instagram, just any kind of social media that made me feel more connected, because there was this like deep sense of loneliness without sounding too depressing. And I found that to be an absolute lifesaver. So in one sense, I agree that, social media is bad for mental health, but also I would say it saved me from going off the edge after 2 months of sitting in an apartment on my own. And I need to get my screen time back down, certainly, but it was the one thing that afforded me actual connection during that time. And actually, it was incredibly beneficial, strangely enough.
I think just going off what Maddie just said, I personally experienced a change as lockdown loosened in the way I felt about my usage of social media. I don't know if I noticed my screen time rocket in terms of, for example, Instagram, but the way that I reacted to the content was different. And I think when everyone was in lockdown and no one was leaving their homes, there was this sort of like unifying humor that was on Instagram about the fact that basically no one was going out on a Saturday night anymore. No one was seeing their friends. And there was this sort of like comfort that no one was doing anything. No one was missing out on anything. And we were all in it together. And I noticed that as the beginning of the summer for the first lockdown, when it started to loosen, and I think particularly people's families approach things differently. Some people went on holiday as soon as possible. Other people were still very much isolating. And I felt quite conflicted, because then there came this sort of flurry of photos of everyone's friends hanging out with each other to sort of almost like promote that people had friends. And personally, I found that quite like social anxiety inducing. I thought, oh my God, everyone's got to remake their friends and re-meet their friends, and you've got to see everyone at once to make sure you've still got friends. And it was completely irrational to feel like that, because ultimately it's so much more than what you see on Instagram, but it's how it made me feel, and I can imagine that it therefore made other people feel like that too. But ultimately the irony is that we will all then go and probably contribute to that by posting the pictures of our friends that we're hanging out with, and it's this sort of like everyone's feeling the same, everyone's conforming to it, and so it sort of continues on. And it's only really when for the 4 hours the other day that Instagram, Facebook and WhatsApp are all down that you don't know what anyone's doing. You're probably all at home with your dogs doing absolutely nothing, and the ignorance is bliss. But I definitely experienced a bit of FOMO, I think they call it, about everyone hanging out and the sort of rush to go and see everyone again.
It's really interesting, Ella, and actually it links to a question we've got from Vanessa Keeling, who was basically asking about the honesty regarding social media. And I think that we know sometimes you are with your friends and in that moment you want to take a photo, and that's wonderful. But at other times it's more of a, well, just the whole thing of how you're behind the screen and how you show your life, and then having to sort of match up to the person that you are online. How does that sort of work? And that, I guess, is probably sort of truer perhaps of Instagram. Well, I mean, even on LinkedIn, maybe one sort of shows himself in a certain way doing this, and it's sort of how your work's going, but actually, you know, it maybe there are sort of little differences. So it's not, I guess, it's like the sort of nuance.
Yeah, if I could just pop in here for a second, I love how you said sort of living up to the standard you've set yourself online and the persona you've created. Like, I have friends who Facetune, like edit their photos, and they don't need to. They've in fact edited me in their photos, which I felt was a little strange, but I'll take it. And you know, the friends who do that, when they turn up to events in real life, like, they have this absolute fear. I have one friend who goes, "Do you think they recognize me?" And I'm like, well, if you're worried if someone recognizes you, then you must know that you're presenting something that is not entirely you, and therefore why would you continue to do so when the minute you turn up and people see you in real life, the charade is immediately over, and you can't never meet people in real life and keep up this face-tuned version of yourself. So it just seems like a very futile thing to like endeavor to even sort of attempt, in my opinion. But you know, each to their own. But I do find it quite strange, because sometimes I'm a bit shocked when I see her after a long time and I go, "Oh, I forgot that's what you look like." Like, it's very strange.
Following on from that, and also what Ella was talking about earlier, I think it's important to also note the fact that these social media apps like Instagram, like TikTok, have really harnessed, and they know that this is how we feel. They know that for example, Instagram is just a highlights reel of everyone's lives. I mean, no one posts them in bed hungover saying that they have like severe anxiety from the night before. And then also during the pandemic, TikTok definitely harnessed the fact that we were all bored sitting at home. And there's a question that like links to this point about how TikTok has managed to develop their app in a way that taps into the dopamine levels in our brains, which makes it all the more addicting. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that these apps are almost, as much as we're using them, they're using us. And I think that, yeah, I think that's an important thing to think about.
I just wanted to add, I think the great question or theme is like honesty. And I've noticed that sometimes we have this interesting boldness online and confidence online, similar to what Ella was saying, that people might not have in person. I remember, you know, I think some people tweeted some not very nice comments about me. And this was like investigated by the school, but knowing these people, they would never actually say that in real life, you know, that they would never actually say it, but online they had incredible boldness about them to do that. And I'm just thinking about actually what incentive do people have to be honest online? Is honesty even rewarded? If you think about, let's say someone, you know, tries to be themselves online and not rewarded through likes or whatever, they might feel that, you know, they are being rejected, and so they have to have a persona, and that's the only way that they're accepted. So I think there's a theme about, do social media companies actually reward honesty, or is there an incentive to be honest? Because I don't see that incentive at the moment.
And well, on that very powerful point, we've only got a few minutes to go. And so I think, linking to what Mary's saying about social media companies and their incentives, I think that we could just get a final sentence from everyone. And I'm going to take and combine a few of the questions from our wonderful attendees. And so about perhaps sort of a legislation on social media to make the apps less addictive, given, as Millie pointed out too, the dopamine responses we get from them. That was from Georgie Glass. And then from Catherine Walker, talking about how actually, given that social media is so ubiquitous, should there be a form of training almost? Should it be sort of taught perhaps as part of PSHE? I think from when I was at school, there was no, I don't think there was any training on this is how you do social media, but maybe that's because it was only Bebo back then. And I think it would be really interesting. We just get a quick little bit from each of you on what you think to those points and just any other points sort of going forwards in how we should connect on social media. So maybe we start with Madeleine.
Yeah, all really interesting questions. I mean, I think, I think social media companies are totally aware that they make it very easy for users to hide behind usernames and be basically untraceable. In terms of sort of keyboard warriors who hide behind their screens under multiple aliases, I've had experience with that, and sort of cyberbullying of an entire group of people. And we were all terrified of this person who was totally anonymous and wielded many accounts. And then when he was actually found by the police, because it ended up being quite a dangerous situation, he was just this incredibly quiet 30-year-old man, lived with his mum, never left his bedroom, just the last person you'd expect. And he was so able, through these social media companies and their lack of sort of double checking anything, to go out and sort of cause havoc on everywhere, which is interesting. And to the point of the dopamine hits, I'm a product manager for a mobile app, and I've got to say, my boss is constantly essentially asking me to design a product that does exactly that. And he tells me, download TikTok, see what they're doing to get people hooked, do it, we need this. And so it's like this I've got a moral conundrum happening, to be honest, where if I'm doing my job right and I'm getting the users and the metrics that I want to be receiving, technically I should be giving that satisfying feedback, that quick content, the algorithm that just keeps you watching. But I also have this sort of, I've been directly affected by TikTok, and I have this horrible feeling that that's not the effect I want to give to users. And I don't want to take over their lives, I want to enhance their lives. But I also want my product to be incredibly successful. So it's, this sort of, meeting of 2 points. But both questions were very interesting, and this panel's been great to take part in.
I think I'll just follow on with I think the second question was about schools and their responsibility in that. And when I think it was GCSE year, Ask FM was running riot around pupils, and that was horrific, because essentially anyone anonymous could ask anything on a platform where, mortifyingly, everyone following you could then see this. And our school took a pretty heavy stance on it and said, if you get caught doing this, it's suspension, expulsion, depending on the content, because it was a sort of bullying completely beyond control of teachers knowing who it was. But I think there is a massive responsibility for the apps and also schools to educate people to use them intelligently and kindly. And I think in the same way that, for PSHE or wellbeing lessons or whatever it's called in each school, they also talk about drugs and alcohol and the dangers of that. And I think technology and apps and social media is an addiction that is just as dangerous, and if not more, because you don't have to show an ID now when you create certain accounts. You don't get arrested if you walk into an off license and buy a bottle of vodka age 13. Parents can't even control what kids are doing on their phones. And I don't think it's entirely anyone's responsibility. It's sort of a sort of widespread global issue for everyone to deal with together. But to teach people how to use it intelligently and kindly, I think is a starting point, at least. both for that individual themselves and the way that they affect other people going forward, because it is something that I think if the addiction is channeled in the wrong way could be detrimental to someone's well-being and safety, I suppose.
Wonderful. And Millie?
I think something that's important to remember, and I think this is why the Youth Summit is so important, is that the success of social media is dependent on its users, on people, rather than the technology of the app itself. And so having people at the forefront of discussions about digital well-being is, I think, the way that we can promote change. So with the questions about like what can be done to ensure that people can be safe online, I think it's definitely important to start these conversations at school while children are still young, to make sure that the understanding is there from the offset about the detriments of social media and how it can be harmful and how to practice healthily and safely online, I think.
And just, following on from Millie, I would say something I realised is quite brutal is, social media companies absolutely do not care about you. They do not care about you. That's not what they're there for. They're there to make profit. They make money from your attention, from your limited time. What we have to do, I believe, is like take responsibility for your own attention and think about what kind of relationship do you want with social media, and cultivate that, because you give yourself that power to decide that dynamic. And we don't rely on social media companies to fix something that they do not profit from fixing.
Thank you, Mary. So I think that is something that we can all go away and try and do. And it's been such a delight moderating this panel of wonderful people. Thank you, Ella, Madeleine, Millie, and Mary. And thanks a lot to LookUp for hosting this panel alongside Social Dilemma and obviously the wonderful AGL Communication. And I say again that we have our challenge launching today, and it's for 17 to 24-year-olds. I know you might be a little bit nervous because the competition on this panel alone is pretty terrifying, but it's definitely worth taking part, and we can't wait to hear how you would improve digital well-being. So thank you once again. And the good news is the action doesn't stop here. We've got a panel starting in about 10 minutes, which is hosted by Ryan Bell. And then we have another panel at 5 o'clock, which is about social media algorithms distorting our perception of reality. And that's got Lawrence Ampofo, a digital wellbeing expert, making a speech at the beginning. And then Nelson McMillan of LookUp is moderating a panel with students from Brighton College, St Paul's Girls' School, and Downhouse. And then at 6, we have a panel on social media companies have a moral responsibility to encourage positive technology use in its users. I think from what Mary just said, we shouldn't have too much of a hope that they will do that, but we will see what the panel have to say. And that again is students from Brighton College, St Paul's Girls' School, and Downhouse, with Ryan Bell moderating. And then at 7, very exciting for me as a QPR fan, we have Neda Manua, former QPR captain, Man City player, real Salt Lake City player, which is in Utah, getting interviewed by Minnie Stevenson, who is an award-winning Channel 4 journalist. And that's at 7 o'clock. And they're talking about whether social media is fueling racism in football. Anyway, for now, thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you at later events. Bye.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.